Right, so the story I'm about to tell you, something that happened 120 years ago. So you might ask yourself, how old is this guy telling this story? Well, I'm 34. How much do I know about something that happened 120 years ago? Well, if you think to yourself, let's say, for instance, the average age at which a father has his first child might be 30 years old, which means that my dad's 30 years older than my dad is 30 years older than me, his dad was 30 years older than him, and his dad was 30 years older than him. That gives you about 120 years. 4 generations, 120 years. So, even though it seems like quite a long time ago, basically, it's still close enough where I could have known the person that told that story. Right, so just some background to the story. This happens during the Anglo-Boer War, which happened it started in 1899. And the idiom that I'm referring to in this story is there's quite a famous thing, especially amongst Afrikaans-speaking people, uh, where we say, so whatever the problem is, something we like to say is 'n boer maak 'n plan. So in English that would translate to, the direct translation would be the farmer makes a plan. But I think in this particular situation, when the word boer is used, it definitely refers specifically to the culture of Afrikaans people. And that's not to say that obviously the term boer or boer or however you say it, while that directly translates to farmer, I think in our current culture and whatever, it's something that's become quite accustomed, especially to Afrikaans farmers. Anyway, so the story I want to elaborate on is basically one example of a boer maak 'n plan. So the situation is, right, so the war breaks out. Britain has decided to annex South Africa. At this point, they've already colonized Cape Town, or the whole of the Cape, including East and North West Cape. But there are two republics that are free, in the sense of they are not colonized by the British. It's the Republic of the Transvaal and the Republic of the Free State, which, while we now know South Africa as a united country, including KwaZulu-Natal and all of the Cape and the Free State and Gauteng, and Mpumalanga, etc., etc., at that point, Britain basically had control over the Cape Colony and Natal as well. And then there was these two republics, the free republics, which were the Republic of the Transvaal and the Republic of the Free State, which were their own countries, really. So if they referred to the Republic of the Transvaal, they were talking about a country. They referred to it as a country. So they wouldn't have a premier or a mayor of the Transvaal, or like a mayor of Gauteng or whatever, like we have now, or a premier. They would have the president of the Transvaal or the president of the Free State, which is, just to give you some background to the story. So big situation at that point. As the war goes over, this is now more towards the end of the war, so you think the war lasted about 3 years, so this might have been about 2 years into the war. Most Well, I mean, the British had a very strong force, and they were basically the biggest empire in the world at that point, going up against a couple of thousand farmers, basically. So there was no structured military. They were militia. So militia is basically, uh, you might know the word militia. It's like a private army. Anyway, so the point of the story is the men are in the field. They no longer want to fight in the normal way that battles are done on a battlefield, in the sense of we all stand across from each other like a chessboard. You get a chance to shoot, I get a chance to shoot, and then whoever, it's almost robotic. It's a place where the way the farmers fight is there's no structure. Now we all stand in a queue or any of that. They're basically out in the field and fighting on horseback without a uniform. There's no structure to it, yet it's an incredibly effective way of fighting, just because it's so unconventional at that point. But the situation then arises where, because the British, they're not used to that way of fighting, and because they're fighting an enemy who doesn't want to give up even though the battle's been won, they now have to find a special way to win the war, because the situation is completely out of hand. So according to the rules of war, or what the British considered to be the rules of war, once you take the capital of a country, you then own that country. All you have to do is take over the capital, hoist your flag, and then you've won the war. But the Afrikaners don't think that way, or the farmers, they don't think that way. They feel like they'll stand till the last man dies. So now they're out in the field, they're not in the capital. So the British basically walk into the capital of the Free State, and they walk into the capital of the Transvaal, taking those states as if they own them, but now there are no people in those states, because everyone's out in the field on farms fighting, and they won't give up. They don't feel the need to give up until the last man dies, which is quite stubborn, and I feel that Afrikaners are quite prone to being quite stubborn in that sense. But the moral of the story is this situation. So what Britain then does, especially, so the chief of the military in South Africa at that point, from the British side, is someone called Lord Kitchener. Right, so Lord Kitchener gets brought in because the British now no longer know how to deal with these rebellious farmers. Lord Kitchener gets brought in because he had a lot of success during Britain's campaigns in India. So at this point, India has already become have all become British citizens, because Britain and India have come into conflict years before. Now India forms part of the British Empire, as most of the world at that point had become part of the British Empire. He then, because he had so much success in that war, in suppressing nations and things like that, they then decide, bring Kitchener to South Africa, because he might have a way to deal with these farmers, these stubborn farmers. In fact, he is actually called Lord Kitchener of Khartoum, I think, which is obviously the battle in India where he had major success. So what he then says is, right, if we can't get these farmers to fight us in a normal way, what we'll do is we'll take their women and children, put them in concentration camps, and burn down their farms. Because the thing is, we can't fight them in a rational, normal way, which we consider to be a civilized way of doing it, and they're unwilling to give up, so we'll have to fight them where it hurts. So a big thing for Afrikaners still today is their land and their property, and there's obviously a lot of controversy that's come in with that. But the thing is, the whole thing about a farmer is obviously what is most important to him is property and the fact that he has a piece of land that is his own. Right, so that's a very long intro. Point of the story is this. So while the farmers are out in the field fighting, the person who tends to that farm and now has to take control of that farm is his wife. And now where those lands have, obviously when the farmer is on the land, he tends to the land, and the land needs to be plowed. And for something to grow on that farm, the farmer needs to be involved, and not be involved in war, but involved in farming. But now the problem is, because the farmers are out in the field fighting a war, the women and children who stay home now have to tend to the farm, and now need to take up a role that they hadn't taken up before. And basically, this is where I want to bring in the idiom of 'n boer maak 'n plan. So quite a famous story out of this situation is where a wife who now is getting quite frustrated with the situation of the lands not being tended to and nothing growing on the farm, sends a letter to her husband saying, well, in Afrikaans, what she says is, gaan jy een of ander tyd terugkom, want die lande is nie geploeg nie, ons kan nie eet nie, niks groei nie, want die lande is nie geploeg nie. Which basically translates to, I mean, we really appreciate you being out in the field, but without you on the farm, nothing's growing on the farm, none of the lands are being plowed, and there is no progress on the farm. And other than that, we've got a situation where we're surrounded by British the whole time, and nothing's happening on this farm. Are you coming back at any point? So the husband then, in his ultimate wisdom, then sends a letter back to the wife, which says, well, the Afrikaans that he says then is, luister, vergeet van die lande wat geploeg word, en maak seker die lande word nie geploeg nie, want al ons wapens, al ons gewere, is begrawe binne in die land. Which then translates to, whatever you do, make sure the lands don't get plowed, because all my ammunition, all the weapons I have, are buried in that ground, in that field. So don't let anyone get near that field, because they're going to discover all our weapons. Time goes by. Obviously, the letter gets intercepted by the British, and the wife then sends back a letter to the husband saying, you're such a fool. You know this letter would be intercepted, and you send me this thing. And now what the British have done, they've dug up all the ground, but the big problem is they didn't find any of your weapons. To which the husband then sends back, well, at least the fields have been plowed. And the moral of the story is, even in that situation, 'n boer maak 'n plan. And that's my story.